Well, I'm very delighted to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the Brazil-Canada relationship and share some views on what I see as the road ahead. This is a pretty distinguished group, and I could probably go off on a range of different issues, so I'm going to try to constrain myself to a certain degree to talk about the recent visit of the Prime Minister and the results of his visit with four ministers, John Baird, Ed Fast, Diana Blonsey, and Rona Ambrose. The Prime Minister's team brought forward renewed focus and vigor to advancing Canada's interests with Brazil as part of Canada's America strategy. But before I get into that, allow me to thank particularly Jennifer Jeffson, the Canadian International Council, Susan Purcell, and the Hemispheric Center, University of Miami, for putting together, and the foresight actually for pulling together what will be, I'm sure, an interesting set of conversations on Brazil, a strategic partner with whom I believe we can diversify our interests and advance them in terms of our mutual prosperity. I'd also like to thank Bennett Jones, Jessica, good to see you here, for their generous sponsorship of this event as well. There are a number of special guests here today, and I won't go through all of them, but I'd like to pay particular greetings to Ambassador Philippe Lampreia, from whom you'll be hearing from later today. He's been a distinguished representative for Brazil, but has also helped guide that country's rise to the global stage as their foreign minister. And we look forward to your remarks, Ambassador. So let me dive right in. No one presentation can cover the range of issues I'm sure that will interest all of you here. And thankfully, we have a fairly robust group of panelists. Last night's dinner taught me anything is how much I actually don't know about Brazil. So you'll, I'm sure, learn a lot from their presentations in the course of the morning. What I may not know a lot about Brazil in some respects, but certainly most Canadians don't know much about Brazil, and certainly not as much as most Canadians know about India and China. And we can talk a little bit later about why that is. This is a country that offers so much opportunity, but we as Canadians tend to ignore it, much to our own detriment. And we need to look at perhaps the reasons why that is, and we can discuss that a little later. Many of us are already familiar with the projections of Brazil's dynamic growth. Over the next 10 to 15 years, it's expected to become the world's 5th largest economy. By 2050, it's likely to outpace all G7 countries other than the US. While we, Canada, have had a long history with Brazil, last year's two-way trade, roughly around $6 billion, pales in comparison to the potential that we have between us. Overall, trade and investment exceeded about $29 billion. But the real story here within that is the investment portfolio, which is approximately $23 billion. Brazil is the 8th largest source of FDI in Canada, and it's growing. Brazil is the 11th most important destination for Canadian investment, and that's growing. But as Prime Minister Harper said in his address to the Brazilian private sector in Sao Paulo, for the size of our respective economies, the friendship has plenty of room and fertile ground on which to grow, and too much grass has grown underneath our feet. So while brimming with potential, the relationship was in serious need of a catalyst, and the Prime Minister's visit served to do just that. He reaffirmed Canada's commitment to Brazil as a key bilateral partner, both in the region and globally, based on our common interests and shared values of democracy, rule of law, human rights, diversity, and inclusion. He underlined the importance and the tremendous potential for our similar resource-based economies and complementary trade and investment relations. He underscored the opportunities for our countries to build partnerships in specific sectors such as infrastructure, energy, science and technology, in order to meet the challenges of the 21st century. And he demonstrated the importance of our relationship as one that commands more frequent, nurturing, and high-level political attention for it to become more multifaceted and more robust. So his messages on Canada's commitment to forge stronger long-term partnership were unambiguous. And in return, President Dilma's acknowledgement and recognition of Canada's relationship was equally as strong and unambiguous. The visit set the stage and challenged both of our communities to be aggressive in creating, exploring our potential and bringing it to fruition. It also committed our governments, and to a certain degree our private sectors, to a series of follow-up actions to deepen and thicken our relationship. So before talking a little bit about the road ahead, let me talk to you a little bit about the transformational changes that I've witnessed in Brazil. Like my colleagues, Abby Dan, our Consul General in Sao Paulo, who many of you know, and Charles Larrabee, our Consul General in Rio, the three of us served in Brazil before. For me, it was 20 years ago. Don't say it. So this time, I mean, our perspective and our vision and our optimism might be enthusiastic, but it's also set against this long-term perspective and this long-term view of how far Brazil has come and how far it can go. That perspective offers us a sense of confidence, if you will, that Brazil is quite capable of moving great strides into the future, notwithstanding what some today are looking at recoiling towards somewhat of a protectionist past, and we can come to that conversation. So what have been the most profound changes in our view? In the late 1980s, just a year or two before I arrived in Brazil, Brazil had just emerged from 2 decades of military government. 2 decades of military government, less than 2 decades ago. So it's incredible to think about the change of what the Brazil that we see today, a consolidated, mature democracy, a robust electoral system that successively has delivered peaceful and orderly transitions. When you look around the world today, that's not something to sneer at. And even despite a 1992 presidential impeachment, Brazil continued a peaceful political transition. It's confident, it's mature, and there's little risk of democratic backsliding. And we both share our countries the projection of democratic values as key pillars of our foreign policy. On the economic side, many of you may remember the astronomical 1,000% inflation a year, 100% a month. Daily decisions on what you would buy and sell depended on whether you paid cash or whether you paid credit. Companies and consulates and embassies would take decisions as to whether or not they would exchange currency in the morning or that night, depending on exchange rates. We've come a long way since then. Perhaps the only upside to that daily roller coaster was the development of world-class and sophisticated financial information management systems, which allowed for the banks to have extraordinarily efficient transactional and clearing facilities to do that on a continual basis. And it's the result of that stable, conservative financial management system that Brazil weathered through the 2008 financial crisis as well as Canada did. So it's broken through its cyclical economic past, and today it still has an inherent allergy towards slipping back to inflation. Beyond the economic and the political advances that Brazil has made, perhaps the most notable of its achievements has been the social reforms that we've seen in the last 10 years, 15 years, which resulted in lifting tens of millions of people out of poverty and into the middle class. Tackling poverty and inequality have cleared a pathway forward for better nourishment, health, education, and training. And the result has been a vital political ballast for democracy and towards reinforcing an already substantial internal market. Speaking of internal markets, we can't really consider Brazil today to be an open market the way many of us would consider it. But it too has come a long way from the archetype of the import substitution, protectionist market that we saw, where local manufacturing industries had no competition from international manufacturers. I see David from RIM, and back then, Jim Balzilli would have been hard-pressed to find a cell phone, even the size of milk cartons that they were back in the early 80s. And now RIM is assembling blackberries in Sao Paulo. Other companies, Asian and Europeans, are as well manufacturing their products, the RCP products, in Brazil. And today, Brazil is ranked as the highest consumer of laptops, televisions, tablets, and cell phones in the world. Buy your stocks. Brazil also has the 4th largest automotive manufacturer in the world, with major international car manufacturers turning out record numbers of vehicles. And so in addition to Fords, GMs, and Volkswagens, Brazilians are snapping up new cars such as Hyundais, Kias, Toyotas, Fiats, Peugeots, Citroens, and even the Chery, the Chinese car, is going to be built there, and you can be absolutely sure that the Indians won't be far behind. Their world-class aircraft manufacturer, Embraer, which, while competing with Canada's Bombardier, also offers very valuable global supply chain market for Canadian engines, principally through Pratt & Whitney, as well as to a huge number of Canadian sub-suppliers that offers parts and avionics to its industry. I've been told that up to 18% of some Embraer aircraft is made up of Canadian content. So in light of increased competition from the traditional large aircraft manufacturers, Boeing and Airbus, there are new entrants coming into the market. And this offers, I think, the two companies, Bombardier and Embraer, an opportunity to collaborate as well as compete on the international stage. 21 years ago, the 21st knowledge-based economy was just knocking at Brazil's doors. And today we're seeing growing interest in science and technology partnerships that can add value to our supply chains. In particular, life sciences, biotech, nanotech, ocean tech, information technologies, in addition to the traditional sectors of oil and gas, mining, food, agriculture, and forestry. So Brazil emerges into the 2nd decade of the 21st century, showing that responsible democracy and markets can deliver development. It's a powerful message and a major achievement. And looking forward, there's a sense of confidence and optimism, both amongst Brazilians and the international community, that Brazil can and should contribute in substantial ways to a larger global agenda, to being a more present and more responsible global stakeholder. This is part of the objectives that we have with deepening our relationship with Brazil over the longer term. But there are gray clouds to all this silver lining. Brazil has moved so far and grown so quickly that it's outstripped its infrastructure. And some of our panelists will speak to that this afternoon or this morning. There are not enough roads, highways, ports, airports, or transit systems to move goods or product or people internally or internationally. Airports are crowded, and the life veins of a booming economy are suffocating. Perhaps more challenging than the hard infrastructure problems are the soft infrastructure problems, the human resource base. There's a severe shortage of skilled and semi-skilled labor to develop the huge infrastructure investments being planned, as well as a shortage of professionals such as engineers and business managers. And while Brazil should be commended for its conditional cash transfer program that enabled millions of children to go to school, the investments in education have not yet taken root. The results so far have been a lot more about quantity, the number of kids in school, than quality. Investing in education can take up to 15 to 18 years, as we've seen in the case of South Korea. And apart from the serious shortage, it's extremely expensive to hire. Today, Brazilian executives command amongst the highest salaries in the world, as reported by the Financial Times and the New York Times. And just about 3 months ago, I was in Calgary speaking to some oil and gas engineers who are looking to hire professional engineers in Brazil. And the sweet spot for most people, as you know, of an engineer is between 12 to 15 years of experience. And if you're looking at an engineer in Calgary or in Edmonton, it's probably going to earn between $175,000 to $200,000, depending on the package. In Brazil, that same engineer would earn between $375,000 and 425 reais. So mark it down to, let's say, about $400,000. If I was an engineer in Calgary and I spoke Portuguese, I'd look at the sunshine and the beaches in Brazil than staying up north. But that means a lot to Canadian companies investing in manufacturing in Brazil. It's a challenge for them to find good professional help as well as skilled labor. So beyond this, Brazil has outstripped its already burdensome regulatory structure, characterized by a Byzantine and complex tax system and costly red tape. But at the end of all of this, these are actually, if there can be such a thing, these are actually good problems. These are the problems of success. These are the problems of growth, and these are the problems of a vibrant economy. We wouldn't be here talking about infrastructure gaps or skill set gaps if a country like Brazil wasn't growing as quickly as it were. These are challenges that can be solved by political determination and sound policy. So in the end, what might end up being an increasingly resource-scarce 21st century, Brazil, like Canada, is a master of its own future. Today, the Brazilian government is very much aware of the challenges and appears to be committed to taking them on, albeit on their own terms. President Dilma Rousseff, Brazil's first female president, hit the ground running. In taking office, she faced a number of hurdles: keeping the macroeconomic policies in place, maintaining the social and economic trajectory of her predecessors, and tackling the huge infrastructure and education gaps we just talked about. But given her previous experience as Minister of Energy and Mines, as well as being responsible for Brazil's massive infrastructure stimulus packages, she's on familiar ground, well familiar and well able to take on these challenges. But doing so for her means confronting the forging of a serious political consensus, which can be challenging, especially when she is as resolute as she is in rooting out corruption. And in the first 5-6 months of her term in power, 5 ministers have resigned, or she's accepted the resignation of 5 of her ministers on the allegations of corruption. So we would commend her in terms of maintaining this fight against corruption. But you can imagine for her, who has to manage a delicate political consensus back home, it's a challenge. When she opened the UN General Assembly last week, she was the first woman in history to have done so, which I think speaks a lot for where Brazil has come, and many countries, in fact. And she expressed great concern about the deteriorating international economy. She makes absolutely no bones about critiquing US and European financial monetary policy or the lack of leadership, which she says has been dragging the dynamic emerging economies down along with them. In their bilateral, the Prime Minister and the President, it was roughly about 50 minutes. The first 15, and it took place on a Monday morning, right after the Standard & Poor's downgrading. I can assure you she wasn't in a good mood. And the first 15 minutes of the conversation focused very specifically on each other's views on the downgrading and what Canada and Brazil could do together in terms of signaling to the international community the need to move forward in a constructive way. Clearly, she was signaling through the Prime Minister to the US government and through the Prime Minister to the European governments in terms of her displeasure and her concerns on where the international economy was going. And she quipped to a certain degree, I'm going off text now, but she quipped to a certain degree with respect to the IMF and recalled saying, you know, we created those institutions to help developing countries like ours bail ourselves out, and now we, the developing world, are supporting the IMF bailing out Europe. So she saw that as a great irony, as I'm sure all of us do. Dilma is under no illusion of the scale of her challenges, but she's a tough-minded, hard-working, no-nonsense leader. She's prepared to impose an arsenal of what she calls an arsenal of measures to safeguard the Brazilian economy, designed to secure short-term growth while investing in the future. And some of the recent policies, such as Brasil Maior, which is the Greater Brazil, policies may be seen today as protectionist, too light on innovation, and falling back to old policies. A little too early to tell, but for example, last week's tax on imported automobiles looks very much like a return to the old days. But even that measure was really at the behest and support of North American and European car manufacturers in Brazil seeking to protect their markets. For other global manufacturers of automobiles who don't produce in Brazil, some of them could lose up to 50% of their profit margin in this market. So there's a bit of a signal there that when you're in the tent, you're in the tent. And when you're out, you're really out. The question will be, will other sectors get scooped in? It's too early to tell right now. And of course, for many companies, it's the ICT and electronics sector that represents the greatest threat in many respects. Much of this will depend on the lobbying efforts of specific and manufacturing sector groups, and we have specialists on political lobbying, and perhaps you can speak to us on that a little later on. So Brazil has come a long way in establishing global presence, and it's forging international partnerships to match its global ambitions, and the time couldn't be better for Canada to become engaged with them. When our two leaders met, they outlined a fairly ambitious action plan. And the road ahead invokes the creativity and the drive of our private sector. It calls for the innovation and collaboration of the science and technology communities. It seeks to forge deeper ties amongst our education institutions, and it lays the groundwork to facilitate and enhance the movement of business travelers, students, tourists, and communities in general. So allow me just to touch on a few of these. I won't go into too much detail. First and foremost, the Prime Minister invited the President for a long overdue visit of a Brazilian President to Canada. And while the dates are still being worked out, we look forward to welcoming her to Ottawa in the second semester of 2012. Like the visit of the Prime Minister to Brazil, such a visit will serve as an action-forcing event, pushing forward our plans and keeping high-level political momentum alive. The two leaders will launch a strategic partnership dialogue between our foreign ministers. Now, this will serve as a unique forum for our two governments to sketch out points of conversion, compare notes on global challenges, and to a certain degree, explore together how we can respond. The color and the texture of that dialogue will depend to a large extent on conversations such as the ones you're going to be having today and the feedback that you provide to governments on that very road ahead. Our Joint Economic and Trade Council, which was reinvigorated in 2009, as well as a consultative mechanism on agriculture, will allow us to brainstorm on how we can build on common priorities in trade, investment, and agriculture. The Prime Minister also announced an energy dialogue, which creates an opportunity for our two countries, both energy powerhouses, to discuss how to contribute not only to each other's prosperity, but to share perspectives, experiences, and technology. The energy dialogue, I believe, could also create an opportunity for our two countries to discuss the challenges of meeting the 21st century's global demands for both traditional and renewable sources of energy. I'm glad to see Susan Harper here, who is our chief negotiator for the Mercosur-Canada FTA, or the exploratory talks towards that. The Prime Minister, speak to Susan. The Prime Minister announced his support for exploratory talks for this possible FTA. This hopefully will allow our governments, with input from our respective stakeholders, to determine and assess the range and the scope for Canada's interests. And indeed, Canada is one of the few countries, along with the European Union, with whom Mercosur is considering extending preferential access to their markets. Good luck in your conversation, Susan. I know it's not going to be an easy task. The Open Skies Agreement, backed by the Canadian Tourism Commission, Commission's decision to reinvest in Brazil, will boost two-way tourism and trade. So what's the Open Skies Agreement? It should allow for, ideally, our companies, Air Canada on our part, and TAM and Gold and others, to increase the air links between our two countries. And I, for one, would love to see a direct flight not only to Toronto, but more direct flights to Toronto, a direct flight or two to Vancouver, and a direct flight to Montreal. So I'd urge the business community, academic institutions, and others who see the value in this to contact the companies and urge further negotiations. The ground is set from a regulatory perspective, so it's really now up to the companies themselves to decide what the traffic will bear. A social security agreement was signed as well, which will allow workers who work for many of the companies here, both Brazilian and Canadian, to share and protect their benefits, irrespective of where they may be. And this might seem like a dry sort of agreement, but it makes a big difference for professionals on both sides of our border. We have an MOU supporting Brazil's Olympic and World Cup events, and enable Canada to share its full range of experience in staging world-class events. As part of extending our global values, we share a commitment to help less fortunate countries in the advancement of their own development. And after 40 years of active engagement in Brazil, CETA wound down its activities there as Brazil has repositioned itself from being a recipient country to emerging as a new development partner. And with deep historic and linguistic links to Africa, Brazil today has a keen interest in supporting the development of that continent. And Canada's experience in effective and accountable development citizens can serve to support Brazil in its desire to contribute. Part of this includes sharing the experience of our mining industry in corporate social responsibility, an area where our industry has built a global reputation for sound corporate practices, and where Brazilian government and the Brazilian industry itself has asked for further collaboration, not only in Africa, but in the region as well. So I'd commend Canadian companies, particularly the mining industry, to work closely with Brazil towards that. A Brazil-Canada S&T, Science and Technology Framework Agreement, was a milestone in our relationship. Our researchers will play a key role in crafting the future platform for economic growth and prosperity for both our countries. We need to support our private sector by a greater exchange of researchers, students, and professors. And through such initiatives, we can actually start to undertake innovation together, bringing new products and services to the market. And while people will complain about BNDES, which is the National Development Bank of Brazil, they have set up facilities to support the development of S&T, new innovative products, and companies, foreign or not, present in Brazil, collaborating with Brazilians, can have access to that financing and take advantage of those facilities. So I'd urge Canadian companies and organizations to think about creative ways how they can partner with Brazilians for the long term towards taking advantage of that. The commercialization of science and technology will be a key driver to our prosperity. And Canada contribute to and be part of President Rousseff's ambitious initiative, Science Without Borders, a program which comes with increased investment in innovation, R&D, and education. And this includes 100,000 scholarships for the best and brightest Brazilian students to go abroad and expand their horizons, and in turn, to expand Brazil's growth possibilities. Canada should be a focal point for some of these students, and as we're actively promoting Canada as a center for educational excellence within this program. And we start from a good position. Very few of you will know that Canada is the #1 or preferred destination for Brazilian students studying abroad. The #1. The other side of the coin is that it's short-term, 6 to 12 months, and educational, whether it's English or French. So the challenge for us is moving that up the value scale towards secondary and post-secondary education, for more exchange of researchers and professors, to establish joint programs between our universities, and allow for these people-to-people links to enhance. Most of the people I speak to that have an affinity and a passion for Brazil come to that from their time as students in Canada and the relationships developed in schools. All sorts of relationships developed in schools. So with this respect, moving on the education agenda, the the Prime Minister also announced the Governor General's visit in April, where he will lead a delegation of 20 university and college presidents to come to Brazil to participate in a major education fair in Rio as part of his state visit. This is a huge opportunity for Canadian universities and colleges and institutions to really develop and enhance their engagement in Brazil. And of course, the embassy and the consulate are actively engaged in promoting that. So don't hesitate to contact me should you want more information on that. So overall, the government is here, our government is here to enhance, to help Canadian companies enhance their prosperity. We're here to help create the enabling environment to help identify opportunities, facilitate relationships, and to tackle some of the difficult structural problems. But the future of Canada's business relationship with Brazil should be and will be written by the Canadian private sector. After all, it's business that does business. And at this respect, our relationship, our business relationship, has reached a tipping point, where the alignment of our interests and our capacity is such that we can sort of jump to the next level. And to get us there, the Prime Minister and the President launched the creation of the Canada-Brazil CEO Forum. This landmark initiative will send a powerful signal that the future of the business relationship will be driven by our private sectors. The Prime Minister appointed Scotiabank Chairman Rick Waugh, one of Canada's leading and most respected CEOs, to be the Canadian co-chair. The Canadian Council of Chief Executives, led by John Manley, has volunteered to serve the role of the Canadian Secretariat to that enterprise. For her part, Dilma Rousseff handpicked Murillo Ferreira, who's the CEO of Vale, one of Brazil's global firms and a significant investor in Canada. He will serve as the Brazilian co-chair. Between Mr. Waugh and Mr. Ferreira, we could not have a more powerful set of business leaders committed to deepening of the trade and investment relationship between our two countries. And in typical CEO fashion, they're losing absolutely no time in getting down to work. The two co-chairs will convene 6 CEOs from each side for their first meeting, ideally before the end of this calendar year. I know that much thought has already gone into defining the specific objectives of what they would like to achieve, including important social issues. People have asked me on this one, how do I contribute towards that if my CEO is not part of that committee? Well, you've got a very vibrant Canada-Brazil Chamber of Commerce, both here in Toronto, Raul leads that here, as well as in Sao Paulo, and as well through the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, Sam Bujuvis, who you know is the Vice President for International Policy, working with John Manley, will be taking in comments and priorities from the business community as a whole. Don't be shy, step up, express your concerns, your ideas, your thoughts of how you can collaborate. The group is not meant to be exclusive in terms of just looking at the interests of the sectors of those CEOs, and the announcement will come out, I suspect, in the next 2 weeks as who those will all be, but is really meant to represent the range of Canada's interests in Brazil. Take advantage of this opportunity. I think it's a great one. So at a broader level, Canada can benefit from a more confident Brazil on the world stage. And Brazil is now projecting itself with purpose and confidence, as evidenced by its regional leadership in South America and expanding relationships within the BRICS, IBSA, India, Brazil, and South Africa, and growing South-South cooperation. And clearly, Brazil aspires to be one of the key architects of shaping a new global governance system, away from traditional post-World War II institutions towards new alliances. Brazil's actions, or recent actions, have demonstrated clear independence and based on its own worldview and perspective, ranging from global security issues on Syria, Libya, and Iran, as well as to international financial governance. And the fact that we share common objectives, principles, and interests brings strength to our relationship on the regional and the global stage. And while we may share many common objectives, as in any healthy relationship, there are times that we're going to disagree on how to get there. But what's important is to understand the thinking and the motivations behind each of our actions. And it's with this level of mature and respectful dialogue that we can take the relationship to the next level. And it was the Prime Minister's visit that really underscored the importance of that. And we really look forward to the strategic partnership dialogue between the foreign ministers as an elaboration of this first step. As the Prime Minister said during his visit to Brazil, the rise of Brazil is also a story in which Canadians would welcome the opportunity to play a larger role. We are two countries with so much in common, and yet we're to a large degree, unknown to each other. We actually look past each other. That might be because of the United States sitting between us. And for many Canadians, as soon as they look towards Latin markets, they go immediately to Mexico, where we have a NAFTA agreement, or to Chile, and perhaps to Colombia. But beyond that, we tend not to look at Brazil. And when we also look at Brazil, we have to remember that Brazil is not a Spanish-speaking country. It's a Portuguese-speaking country. And if you want to engage in Brazil, don't send a Spanish speaker to Brazil. Invest in somebody speaking Portuguese. Acho melhor, não é? So there's plenty of goodwill, but we both have to work hard towards making the relationship more robust and more multifaceted. This thicker, broader set of interests, supported by more frequent and open dialogue, will serve to create an even more mature relationship, and one that will be able to withstand the inevitable differences that our two countries will have without contaminating the overall relationship. And for those of us who have been involved in the development of the Canada-US relationship over decades, will know the importance of having this thick relationship. There will always be crises. There will always be differences of opinion. But you don't want one crisis, one aircraft dispute, one beef dispute, one kidnapping to put at detriment the entire relationship. It's sort of like having one small stone on a very tight drum. The stone falls and you'll never hear the end of that resonance. It'll just bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce. You want a thick piece of sod where you can drop a cannonball on it and it just makes a thud, one deep hole, but the rest of the ground remains firm. That's a good analogy, actually. I should use that more often. So our trajectory of our relationship is dynamic and promising, and our global value chains have never been stronger. And while our private sectors can and should compete in many areas, they should do so fairly, but while also seeking out the opportunity to use each other as gateways to each other's domestic and regional markets, but more importantly, as platforms to global markets. But Brazil can be difficult to understand and complex to navigate. And of those of you who know the song, The Girl from Ipanema, well, the man who wrote that song said that Brazil is not for beginners. And he had a point. There's a willingness on Brazil's part to engage with us. But the world is knocking at Brazil's door, and it might be for us to take the first step towards making that potential a reality. The Prime Minister and his ministers opened that door, and it's time for us to implement the elements agreed between the two leaders and respond to their calls. We need to encourage meaningful ways to deepen and broaden the relationship. We need to advance partnerships built on ties that already bind us together in business, science and technology, innovation, education, energy, and a democratic vision. And your contributions to this are key. Brazil has often been referred to the country of the future, but that day has arrived. It arrived a long time ago. And while there are challenges ahead, it's never been a greater opportunity for Canadians. Become part of that story and help shape the pathways ahead. Thank you for your time this morning. Enjoy.